This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
Hello, Cardinal fans. Welcome to another episode 7 of the St. Louis Cardinals Unrestricted podcast. This is your host, Christian May Suzuki, and today we look at a much different Cardinal team than we did just a few weeks ago. We're seeing a lot of significant losses to the team that have definitely shown, but there have been some bright spots, and there have been some good things to see. But there also have been some pretty major holes and some pretty concerning things that have been illuminated by some of these injuries. So we have three big names that we're talking here in DeJong, O'Neill, and Carlson, who all came out. Now, I think the DeJong one, my personal opinion, is by far the least impactful. Simply because I don't think DeJong is that great. He's just hasn't shown to be a very consistent hitter, and I've never been particularly high on him as a hitter in general. I think it's definitely shown that he can have his moments and that he has some pop, but I do think that we can replace him a lot easier than a guy like O'Neill or a guy like Carlson. And I certainly think that a guy like O'Neill and a guy like Carlson has way more upside than DeJong. So losing those at-bats for those guys is definitely a lot tougher than for DeJong, of course. Especially when you consider that Sosa is 10 of 21 in the last 6 games while starting at shortstop. And you have a guy like Tommy Edman who could, in theory, play shortstop, who has been slotted shortstop by Mike Schilt in the past and during this period where DeJong has been hurt. But I'm not the biggest fan, and it's not a slight on Tommy's defense. It's simply one issue. It's the reason I don't like Carpenter playing at third, and I never did, no matter how good he was at the time. And that's because he just doesn't have the arm to play short or to play on the opposite side of the infield. You know, that's nothing against him. And that's not some detraction or anything like that. It's just a personal opinion. I just don't think that his arm is strong enough for him to be our everyday shortstop. And hopefully a guy like Sosa can slot in, but we definitely need a guy with a stronger arm than that to slot in every day at short. I like Edman where he is at second. He seems like he's comfortable there, and he's made some good plays, and he doesn't need that huge arm that he just doesn't have. So I think that slotting him in at second base for the near future, or for foreseeable future, is within the Cardinals' best interest, and it's just a matter of finding that guy who can play short, whether it is Sosa, or if DeJong can right the ship and somehow put his numbers back together, which I just don't think he can. And someone else maybe outside of the organization. It's tough to say at this point, but with the way that Sosa is putting up numbers, if he continues at a decent pace, then, I mean, why not stick with him at this point? Now, the outfield is another big issue, but that's sort of been mitigated by the emergence of Harrison Bader. In particular, a lot of people have been praising his abilities or his improvements in hitting breaking balls. Now, I can definitely see that, but I kind of wanted to get a little bit further into exactly what that looks like, exactly how he has improved against the breaking balls. So, this year against the curveball, he's hitting pretty well. He's hitting 4 of 9 on at-bats that end in a curveball, with 2 home runs, so that puts him at a pretty high slugging percentage. And against sliders, it's a pitch that he's notoriously struggled against, and it's something that he's going to end up seeing more. He's hitting 261, which isn't terrible, at 6 of 23, with 4 Ks, and only a 391 slugging. So when it comes to sliders, it's still not the greatest in the world. He still definitely has his issues with that, but there's definitely improvement. You can tell that he's seeing the ball a little bit better, and it doesn't quite show up in the stats yet, but you can definitely see there is improvement. He hit for his career just 177 against the slider with a 303 slugging. So obviously there's a pretty massive improvement. And for the curve, he's in a similar area for his career, hitting 190 with a 293 slugging. So I think that's really where people are getting the impression that he's become a better breaking ball hitter. And he was never, while his batting average was not quite there, he was always seeing the curveball a lot better than the slider. For his career, he only whiffed on curveballs about 10% of the time, 10.6 to be exact, whereas his whiff percentage on sliders was just over 18%. Obviously a big difference, but surprisingly, both are under the league average whiff rate, about 21%. So 1 in every 4 pitches, most MLB players will whiff at, whereas Harrison Bader whiffs at less than 1/5 of the sliders that he faces. Now, for his 2021, that has become even more profound. He has dropped that whiff percentage from a little over 18% to just under 17% for sliders. And for curveballs, he was able to drop that whiff rate all the way down to 6.25%. So with the curveballs, it's just a matter of the pieces coming together. It seemed like he was seeing the ball and he was able to put contact with it and was able to put the ball in play, but it just wasn't quite going his way. And he wasn't able to quite put the ball where the bat put the bat where the ball needed to be. And it just seems like he's found that last piece and he's figured it out, and he's now able to hit the curveball a lot better. And if this can keep up, then it would be a huge improvement. It would be a major development in his improvement in his track and in the Cardinals' plans for an outfield. But that struggle against the slider still does remain. He's hitting it a lot better, but you watch him every game and it still looks like he's just not quite seeing that slider very well. And there are moments where he's picking it up, but it's just not there yet consistently. And in order for him to really slide in to that spot and be that player that we know that he can be and that won't infuriate half the fan base, that whiff rate against sliders got to come down a little bit, and you got to show us a little bit more that you're able to actually keep an eye on those sliders, and it's not just a matter of guessing right, picking up at the plate, and then getting lucky when you put the ball in the bat. Now, with the other spots, it's definitely not a good. It's a clown fiesta, for lack of a better term, and it just doesn't look good. We've had the Justin Williams. As much as I've been a proponent of giving him playing time and giving a kid playing time, he has looked really, really bad. So it's tough for me to really see the Cardinals going with that. But at this point, it's hard to really say where they're going to go as long as O'Neill and Carlson sit out. It's just not been good at all, and it might lead some people to believe that it's a good idea to potentially trade or potentially go for another guy to cull the bleeding a little bit. But at this point, they just got to ride it out, I think. There isn't a particularly strong need, simply because these injuries should not be anything too major. And as long as these guys are able to come back in a reasonable time, the Cardinals are still in a very, very good spot, sitting in the top of the division. Now, seeing a guy like Lane Thomas who's hitting 158, who's the guy coming out tonight, not the most impressive thing. And obviously, without Carlson for a little bit, it got even worse, where you would have a Williams and a Thomas who are both hitting under 200. It just was not a recipe for success. But as long as one of those guys is in, Carlson, O'Neill, as long as two of the three outfielders are healthy, the Cardinals should be just fine. They don't have to worry about trading for an outfielder. They don't have to worry about making any panic moves or panic buys or anything like that. But assuming that does happen, assuming that someone breaks a leg, not that I want that to happen, or ACL, or whatever the case may be, there are a few guys that you could think of that are potential options to trade for. And using the bad teams right now, I think that the two that I would look for are relatively established hitters, but one is probably a safer bet and something that is smoother, but might be more difficult to pull off because of the team he's on. And the second one is a little bit higher risk, but he's only on a 1-year deal, so that risk is definitely mitigated. Now, that deal does have a mutual option as well, so there is a little bit of upside, assuming he does come to the team and play well. But I know there are some Cardinal fans who will scoff at the suggestion of this second person. But in any case, the first guy that I'm thinking of is David Peralta in Arizona. With a guy like Ketel Marte coming back, they have a lot of young outfielders out there, and they're really not doing too much. So an older guy like David Peralta, who for the Cardinals will be cheap, has another year left on his deal at about $6.5 million, is a pretty steady 280 or so hitter, and has been so relatively steady for the last couple of years. That would be the kind of guy that the Cardinals lineup could really need. Just a very safe, steady, smooth hitter that you can rely on to hit the ball, take smart at bats, and put up consistent good numbers. Now, if you're looking for a little bit more pop, a little bit more risk, a little bit more pizzazz, something that could really galvanize the squad from the power perspective, another guy that you could think of is a guy like Kyle Schwarber. He's struggled quite a bit for the Nationals, who have not played particularly well, which is where some of the Scherzer discussion has come from, which if Cardinals don't go after Scherzer, it would be a crime. But Schwarber is another potential option for an outfield change because of just the sheer power upside that he brings. And, it might be a tough deal, tough year, and he might not bring it back around. And if so, then we just cut our losses and move on next year. But if he works and he actually plays up to a decent level, then there's a chance you could keep him, albeit for probably way more than you would want to. But obviously, it's just a matter of how the offseason would unfold, how the injury would unfold. And of course, this is all hypothetical. This is all assuming that someone suffers a catastrophic injury, or multiple people for that matter. But if someone like an O'Neill or a Carlson does suffer a season-ending injury, and you're not satisfied with the Nogowskis, the Williams, the Lane Thomases of the world, then maybe these two guys are guys that you could probably get for not a particularly huge price and could really help on the offensive end. Would for Peralta's end and could for Kyle Schwarber. Now, moving on from the outfield, another guy that I put my finger on or my eye on was Paul Goldschmidt. He was a guy who really, really needed to improve for the team to succeed. And he listened to that. Well, or not listen per se, but he, as I say that, funny enough, Paul Goldschmidt hit an RBI single to break up a no-hitter from the one and only Lance Lynn, which is great timing. But he has really stepped up, hitting 293, 354, 493 in May, which is definitely something that is a good sign to see. But unfortunately, it's still a sign of a massive decline by him. At the end of the day, his last 3 years in Arizona, he was hitting 295, 401, 528. Now, the slugging percentage might be the biggest eye catcher for some people, but I think that some of that discrepancy can be attributed to the parks. As we know, Busch Stadium is a pretty pitcher-friendly park, and by most metrics, it's a bottom 10 hitter park or a top 10 pitcher park in the league. Now, Arizona, on the other hand, is a top 10 hitters park and has been for a while. And in 2018, Paul Goldschmidt's last year there, he was in the third most friendly hitters park in all of baseball. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Obviously, his slugging percentage being pretty decent number of points lower than it was in his last year in Arizona. It's natural in a way because of age decline and because of just the fact that he's in a different park. But what I'm more concerned about is his walks and his strikeouts and his on-base percentage. The 55-point discrepancy between his on-base percentage in May at this high level that he's playing at and his last 3 years in Arizona, which is obviously at a much higher level. He was on pace for 103 walks in 2020 in a 162-game season, which that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for. That's the second spot hitter, the guy that you're looking for around Nolan Arenado. This year, his pace is down to 47, 48-ish. That is not the kind of hitter that you want around Nolan Arenado, protecting Nolan Arenado. Same thing with the strikeouts. He had 43 Ks in 58 games in 2020, which isn't superb, but also is a pretty good mark. But he already has 45 and 44 games this year. That's obviously a major mark, and an increase in strikeouts correlating with a decrease in walks. Definitely not the most encouraging sign. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about your body. It's not just about your bat speed. It's not just about your ability to connect with the ball. It's your ability to stay sharp mentally and your ability to continually track the ball and to see the ball coming out of the pitcher's hands, and just the speed at which your brain has to function is so high. Even little teeny tiny bits of age can wear down and can make a huge difference on those fraction of a second decisions that people have to make. Suddenly you get a few years older and your reaction speed goes down from 0.2 seconds to 0.3 seconds, and suddenly you're missing the fastballs that you were hitting before at 97, or you're just not seeing the balls quite far enough outside. There are all these little factors that go into staying sharp as a baseball player. And while Paul Goldschmidt seems fine physically, we just have to hope that the bat speed will maintain itself and he can get his mind back or his eye back and bring back that walks to Ks ratio, because it is not looking particularly great right now. And part of his value, a huge part of his value, has been his ability to sit at the plate and to draw walks. And it's not someone that has avoided strikeouts particularly exceptionally, but he hasn't been a strikeout merchant per se. So to see the way that the season has turned out, it's still a little bit discouraging. I'm still a bit worried. He's a notorious slow starter, but it's still a bit worrying with all the different factors and age and the pace that he's on. It's a scary thought. So we gotta hope that he hangs on, because he is going to be a crucial part of what we do. If we don't have a guy like Goldschmidt around Arenado, as much as Yachty is a great player, a Hall of Famer, etc., having him as the second best hitter on the team is not a formula for success, unfortunately. And I love Dylan Carlson, but having Dylan Carlson, a very, very young kid, as the second best hitter on the team, also probably not going to lead to any sort of playoff success. It's got to be from the guys who are meant to be successful, and the guys who have the abilities and are being put in the places to be successful. I spoke last time or in other episodes about how a manager's role is to put a player in the best position to win and in the best position to succeed. And if they don't do that, that's on the manager. But on the other hand, it's up to a player when they're put in that position to succeed and they're given a particular role to fulfill. It's on that player to perform and to fulfill that role. So if you're making the right move and you're putting Paul Goldschmidt around Arenado as a way to either put pressure ahead of him or put protection behind him, you're making the right move here, based on the roster, based on what you're paying guys, and based on the performance that you are expecting out of the players. So if he doesn't perform, if he strikes out 150 times and walks 50 times, hits 280, and doesn't really have a huge amount of pop anymore, that's not so much on the manager as it is on him himself. And it's just tough to have to move a guy like that down in the lineup if he does do that, because that's not what his role on the team is supposed to be. In the same way that Paul DeJong has shown that he can't sustain the cleanup spot, and that his role shouldn't be the cleanup spot, and that Schilt should move him down, that's a much different scenario. Paul Goldschmidt is expected to, and has shown that his role on this team is to be that secondary guy. And at the end of the day, it's not on Schilt or on the manager to hold his hand. There is an extent where you're putting him in the best position to win, but at the end of the day, you can't hold his hand. He has to do his job as well. And in May, for the most part, it's hard to complain. He's done a pretty solid job. But there is definitely a room for improvement, and there is definitely signs of a sadder future and of something that you should definitely be worried about. His power can be a little bit fading here and there, and the walks and strikeouts are just definitely on the wrong path, as is his age, of course. So there are all these different little things that you want to keep your eye out on. But if he can continue this pace that he's currently on, it's really hard to complain too much, besides the walks and the strikeouts. That's really my biggest fear with him at this moment. On the starting side, or the defensive side, sorry, the bullpen, it hasn't gone over a huge makeover, but you can tell that we're really missing Jordan Hicks. Now, there's some reasons for that, and it's not just Hicks's absence. It's the struggles of some other guys and the fact that some of these other guys are on the roster. And I'd like to start with Tyler Webb. Now, I'd like to preface my comments by saying it's absolutely nothing personal. It's not a vendetta or anything like that. Look, man, it's a harsh world, and baseball is a cruel game, and I'm not going to sugarcoat what I see. And what I see is a guy who tunneled his pitches well for a little bit and got really, really lucky in many cases with getting guys out and being successful over the last couple of years. But that magic is worn out. The smoke and mirrors are gone. It's blown away, and we see who Tyler Webb really is when pitchers see through the tunneling. And that is a guy who throws a below average fastball with below average velocity and a curveball that looks like a changeup at best. And it's just not there. He doesn't have the stuff at the major league level when guys are throwing 91 mile an hour sliders, when guys are throwing 101, 102, 103 with break. You're not going to get away with 90 poo, as Eric Sim would say, just because you're a left-handed hitter. It's just not going to get you anywhere. And as much as lefties are invaluable, they've especially become a little bit less so with the 3-batter rule and the fact that there is no, one and done lefty. So if we're going to be real here, I think Tyler Webb should have been cut a long time ago. As successful as he's been, I do not think that he has the talent to be a major league pitcher. And he's one of those guys that he would not be a major league pitcher if he didn't throw left-handed. He probably wouldn't have even sniffed Double-A if he didn't throw left-handed. But he just happened to be lucky enough to throw left-handed, and the Cardinals, for whatever reason, have this desire, I don't know what you even call it. Mozeliak has some obsession with having really crappy left-handers on the team just because they're left-handers. And, we're going to wait until Miller is back to cut Webb with a 13 ERA, and I think that right there is the sign of the problem. We don't need a left-hander if he's going to have a 13 ERA and you don't want to bring him in blowout games. A few nights ago, there was a game where Cardinals were up 5, and it would have been a perfect place to put Tyler Webb in, finish the game out. But instead, they left Alex Reyes into the game, and he goes from a nice, clean, quick, I believe it was sub-double-digit pitches, to a almost 30-pitch outing where he's unavailable for that next day. And he's an injury-prone reliever who you're overextending in stressful situations for absolutely no reason, because you don't even want to play Tyler Webb in a 5-run game. And then when you do play Tyler Webb, he gives up more runs than he gets outs. It's not acceptable. And look, we have a lefty who's perfectly fine in Cabrera. We really don't need two if this is what it means to have two left-handed relievers. If we're having the Mark Zebchinskis of the world and the Tyler Webbs and the Tyler Lyons and all these other mediocre, flat left-handed relievers, then I'd rather just have a halfway decent righty instead. I don't see the point of freaking out over this lefty over lefty stuff instead of just getting a guy who can get people out and who has good, strong, sharp stuff and who is suited for this game and for this level of play. Because there are a lot of really talented guys out there with really great stuff who have worked very, very hard. So to see Tyler Webb, who just doesn't have the stuff, he might have worked plenty hard and you might be a great guy, but at the end of the day, it's a results-based league, and it's a league based on ability. And Tyler Webb doesn't have that ability. And he should not be on the team. He should not have been on the team at all, as far as I'm concerned. I as a Redbird Rants guy, you talk to the guys in the chat. You can talk to Matt, the editor, any of those guys, and they'll tell you I might be the head of the Tyler Webb hate club. Not as a person, of course, but simply as a player. I don't believe that he deserved his spot on the roster, and that he got it simply because of Mo's obsession with lefties. And he should be gone. Period. He's not it. He doesn't have the ability, and he really only got it because he's a left-handed pitcher, and that's all. I can say the same thing over and over again, but I think the proof is in the pudding, and the proof is what we see. And if you watch him pitch and you see his stuff, it's just not it. It's not there. Now, a guy whose stuff is there that's just not putting it together is Helsley. Helsley has the infamous Cardinal pitcher problem where, for whatever reason, he feels like he needs to paint 100 miles an hour. And that results in throwing a lot of balls and putting yourself in a lot of bad situations. Look, just throw strikes. I'm not going to be particularly long on this one because I've harped on this plenty. You're a reliever with a lot of talent. It comes down to one thing. Can you throw strikes? Throw the strikes, control the count, and you'll be just fine. But if he continues to not be able to throw strikes and lose guys and be pressured into throwing balls down the middle and condensing the strike zone because you fall behind in counts, you're not going to be successful. But a guy with Helsley's stuff, 100-mile-an-hour fastball and sharp fastball, good breaking stuff to coincide with it, it's someone that can be successful. It's someone that has the ability to put it together, the talent, if you just get the ball in the strike zone. And that's one of the most frustrating things, because there are so many guys who had a lot of talent who just cannot put the ball in the zone. And all you got to do is put the ball in the zone, and you could be one of the best pitchers in the entire league. Alex Reyes. But you just can't quite put it together, and it's frustrating. But I do have faith that Helsley can bring it all back. It's just going to take some time, and it takes throwing the ball in the zone and seeing that even if you do, your stuff is good enough where it's not going to be sent into Kingdom Come. It's not a T-ball pitch every time. Now, the other two guys are Junior Fernandez and Cody Whitley, and they're sort of the reason why I'm thinking we need a Jordan Hicks back. We need a Ponce de Leon back so that Gant can go into the bullpen. We need some last piece because, as Schilt said, he can't play the same 2-3 guys forever. And without Hicks, these couple of guys just aren't ready. If you have one or two more guys to fill that hole and to fill the plug, then it doesn't feel nearly as bad. But having to constantly look at Fernandez and Whitley, it makes it tough. It makes it tough. I just don't think they quite have the stuff and they're quite ready yet. And I think the Cardinals know that too. And they're just forced into the position simply because of the situation that's at hand. But at the end of the day, it's about results and it's about managing these guys properly. And they really have to find a way to, find a replacement for Webb as soon as possible. Hopefully Miller works out, but I think that they do either need to really get Ponce back in the lineup into the rotation as a spot starter, or they need to find one more guy. I think one of my Redbird Rant co-writers had suggested Brad Hand. A guy like that would be a dream, but they just simply need another guy because the way the bullpen is functioning now without Hicks, it's a shell of what it could be, and a team is only as good as its weakest part, and the Cardinals bullpen is really showing that off right now. So it's a matter of filling these little holes because the record that this team is showing is probably not reflective of their performance. And if I were a fan of another team, I'd probably be calling them frauds right now. because they just have not looked like the team that is one of the best in the National League. And if these problems don't get fixed, then there's a chance that they will not be there by the end of the season, for sure. Now, of course, they have plenty of opportunity to do that. I think if Paul Goldschmidt can continue to hit like he has in May, if Jordan Hicks can come back and be reliable, if we can get a guy like Gant back into the bullpen, or we can get one more guy in the bullpen, I think that this team, with the way that it's put together, can actually make some noise. They actually have a decent chance to really put something together. And it's just on the matter of filling these little holes that could turn into a gashing dam if it's addressed too late, or if it's not addressed at all. And that's my only fear with this St. Louis Cardinals front office. Thank you so much for listening, and again, apologies for the delay in the episode. Had some extra stuff going on in life and work, and I think that we're going to stick with a Tuesday morning release. I think that releasing in the mornings is probably more convenient for everybody too. So look forward to seeing another episode on Tuesday morning, and thank you so much for listening. If you got this far, thank you for everything, and go Cardinals.